Welcome to All Saints Forum on Art and Faith. Sorry, faith and life. I'm used to doing this conversation about art and faith, which we do at Goldenwood. But welcome to Forum on Life and Faith, and it's great to have Reverend Dr. David Kim with us, who is a neighbor to All Saints, and we've been friends for a long time. Not only we've been friends, but during the pandemic, when Hedgen and I married in this place with 10 people, you were the were the officiant, and I'm so glad for your journey with us for so many years. Both Hedgen and I share in our experiences of working with you through this faith and work matrix that began with what was known as Gotham Fellowship in New York and now Goldenwood. We just had a retreat here in Princeton and had about a dozen people gather to reflect on their relationship, as many of them are artists, but also entrepreneurs, reflecting on nature and grace and interdependency. So as I want to start with the question of what is AI and artificial intelligence. How do you define this term?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a very esteemed church and beautiful in so many ways, so thank you for the invitation to be here with you all. Well, artificial intelligence as a term has been around since the 50s, so it's not a new term as much as because of the trifecta of hardware, data, and a particular software, the term generative AI has kind of come out of this history of artificial intelligence, and that's become the most interesting because of its very human-like qualities, surprisingly human, and most popularized by OpenAI in 2022, when they released their ChatGPT model to the public, and the adoption rate in a matter of a week with no marketing went to almost 1 million users, there was no precedent for that kind of adoption. And so what they started to realize, it was a surprising human element, which no one anticipated this machine to have, that quickly has taken on the moniker of AI, at least for the popular, the culture at large. But it has gone through, a dark season where no one was really interested or funding AI. But in the last 2 years, there's just been this explosion of not only interest, but funding and concern. And so when I think of AI, I think primarily in the newer evolutions of that esteemed kind of history, and the way that it's surprisingly human. So when I think about artificial intelligence, I think about the movement from what Turing was talking about way back decades ago, of a machine that would be able to almost you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a machine and a human, at least if you didn't physically see. So that's how I imagine AI when I use that term more. Yeah.
So that has particular resonance for me because I grew up in what is now known as the Bell Labs community in Murray Hill, New Jersey. My father being one of the remarkable pioneer in speech and hearing sciences. This term kept on coming up, but the scientists were a little bit reluctant to use the term AI because they realized even back in the 70s that this is not a way to create artificial intelligence, as it were, in the way that science fiction captures this term. My question to you, though, and I'm sure all of us have this question in mind, is how is a pastor now known to be one of the main opinion leaders, I would say, in this field, which Goldenwood as a ministry work to bring work and faith together in love. How do you see this technology and how it's affecting work? How did you get to this point?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is not, a lot of times pastors will say it was after a lot of prayer. But that was definitely, I remember I have a group that meets every month around prayer, direction, and discernment. And this was my question that month for them. This is probably about a year and a half ago. I was getting some more requests to give some talks about AI, and I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be the faith in AI person for many reasons, but I also felt like these opportunities were coming up, and so I asked this group to really pray about this and help me discern if I should kind of go down this path, because I kind of felt like once you go on the path, it's harder to get off. And yeah, they shared some real words of encouragement. I think they were able to discern that this would be important to the future of our culture, our society, and there are various voices speaking into it. But at least from this small group, there weren't many faith voices speaking into it. And my work has always been in this intersection of how does faith begin to inform our sense of calling in the places that we spend most of our waking hours. And given the adoption rate of AI in that first year and the way that it was penetrating into sectors and areas of our culture, again at an unprecedented rate, it just became clear that we need to begin to have the church come alongside of this nation technology in ways that is historically analogous to so many sectors that came out. The church has always come alongside, whether it's the rudimentary days of medicine or various technologies, to be a voice, a co-journer along the development of any industry. And so we live in a very, I think, special time where we're seeing this new technology evolve very rapidly right in front of our eyes. And instead of having the very understandable knee-jerk reaction, how do we begin to allow Scripture in particular to inform how we might come alongside of this technology and perhaps give words that we ourselves might not want to say, but as people who trust the wisdom of God, how might we begin to speak into that, into this space that is quickly growing?
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. You just mentioned the ethical dimension of most of us feel like this is really bad. This is something that can take over, our thinking, our way of life, and but we also don't think about the ramification of what it can do potentially. And for those of us who perhaps have a position that, I don't want to use AI, well, I'm sorry, but you are already. Mm-hmm. If you take a photo on your iPhone or any phone, you're using AI. It's pattern matching biased towards something that the programmers have already programmed into the machine. If you use GPS, right? We're used to using, a computer to guide us to go from A to Z. And when we do that, we notice that the part of our brain that used to read maps is no longer accessible, at least immediately. So how do you view this in terms of human knowledge, as well as how our brains function, and how that might, what do you see as the danger and potential of this technology?
Yeah. Well, I love these kind of questions because they don't happen often in the sense, in the context of the church. And I think I can count the number of people in my life followers of Christ who I think I can have robust conversations with, because there is a real negativity around it. And again, if it weren't for the Scriptures, if it weren't for a particular theological orientation, it's easy to close off because you can imagine, particularly because of a lot of the movies that have come out, more of the negative, almost apocalyptic visions of this technology, more so than the possibilities of how it can perhaps be a tool that brings great flourishing into our world. But I think the framing of Scripture is, for me, the main reason why I feel that as Christians we need to think very deeply about the possibilities of AI when we think about the trajectory of how this technology could be used with all the mounting issues from climate change. It just seems like there's too many variables for us to really feel like we can begin to reverse this in any meaningful way, at least in the near future. Might this be a technology that allows us to see all the different ways that we might be able to reverse some of these things that have taken decades and longer to create? So the possibilities, the upside of AI is the way that it could help us go back to Genesis 1 and the whole cultural mandate of how can we produce the kind of fruit in our world that reflects God's character, God's nature, the kind of flourishing that you see the tremendous amount of life that this planet can really nurture. So I think the upside is just, again, the potential to bring healing, to bring flourishing, to allow that initial mandate to move forward. But for me, the greatest, I guess, downside or the danger is it sounds a bit like a philosophical question, and I'm going to get to this a little bit at the sermon this afternoon or this morning, but it is the question of what is reality. I think when I look at the younger generation, as my two boys, that question, I don't think I ever raised that question when I was growing up. Like, what is real? What is reality? And when I look at the potential of a technology that very quickly deceives our eyes and our from movies to deep fakes, that question of what is real becomes, I think, the greatest threat to humanity and an intelligence that Eric Schmidt, who was just here in Princeton a few weeks ago, talking about super intelligence that probably
this is the Google.
Yeah, former Google CEO, also Princeton alum. He just released a book with Henry Kissinger called Genesis, and I recommend that book. Henry Kissinger, this was his last writing, and he said this was also his most important. And if you know and follow Kissinger's work, he's written on quite a breadth of topics, as well as thought deeply about systemic kinds of issues. But I think that question of reality, of what is real, I think, that for me is probably the thing that keeps me up. Like when people cannot discern reality anymore, and we live in a world where the difference between virtual and what we would now consider reality is not discernible by people, that's profoundly problematic in so many different ways. So I'll just stop there. I mean, we can.
But there are also opportunities there. We talked about this, so I know you believe that there is a huge opportunity. At the same time, there are risks. Yeah.
So when I think about the nature of sin, as I think about it in the Old Testament context, there's that word of idolatry, and the effect of idols, it makes us deaf, dumb, and blind. It diminishes our capacities of attentiveness, of awareness. It reduces things. And I look at the journey of the two cities that we see in Genesis that were created, and we that whole theme will run all the way through to the end of Revelation. But Babel, the technology is used a certain way, motivated by a desire to be like God that echoes again the very temptations that brought about the fall. But then there are also glimpses of how might we use the technologies that humanity creates in ways that, to then use Augustine's phrase, that builds a city of God. And how does a technology like AI could it be used to enhance our awareness, our attentiveness, our ability to perceive more, and how could things like what is becoming more and more common, wearables, embedded with AI help us kind of see beyond our own biases, our own kind of provincial views of the world, and begin to speak to us an ability to relate to people, because it helps us beyond the blind spots that we have. How can it become a tool through which we can begin to see new possibilities of kind of multi-layered variables coming into play that humans can't even begin to think about, because the human mind can only really think about a matrix, a 2x2 matrix of variables, whereas machines can do thousands upon thousands, and just the capacity of that, I think, is what begins to introduce, wow, what are we just missing? What have we not even seen, because our capacities have been so diminished in our own kind of pride, in our own kind of absorption with our own selves and building a name and a city for ourselves.
So as an artist, as a creative person, people, when AI began to claim itself in the domains of design and so forth, people are freaking out, right? And you just spoke to a filmmaker or a writer who is really struggling with this new development. And what actually forced me to think about is, what are some of the types of paintings that I can do that cannot be captured in digital media, right? So everything I do in the studio is somewhat related to that. And when you go back to the map example of using GPS and losing our ability to read maps, there's a sense in which, but we can, first of all, we can get to a place we want to go without getting lost today by using Waze or whatever. And we also are aware of accidents coming on the road. So, if Turnpike has an accident, you can go to 87 and all these things, the awareness of our surrounding. But also what that forced me to think about, and I have been discussing this with my artist friends, is what are experiences that help us to experience a world in which maps didn't exist? For instance, walking around Venice in Italy, if you use GPS, you will get lost because it's literally designed to be a labyrinth. You go one way and it's a dead end, and you go another way. But if you just put down your phone and even put down your map, and then you decide to get lost, you discover things, right? You discover something. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening with all the development. As you expose me to some of the writing tools and some of the thinking tools, I began to discover that, this pushes me away from what I thought that my writing was about, or into this more area of humanity, deeply integrated humanity that I wasn't even pushing myself to go. But now, like going to Venice, I feel like, maybe I should do more of this. Yeah. And something about this, it occurs to me, will lead to new discoveries. Now, let's talk about Golden Wood. I have this noteless book here, and you have been helping all of us journey into this complex reality of technology and reality with a capital R, with particular focus on raising awareness or training skills to listen. What is your vision for Golden Wood? How is it helpful in this reality?
Yeah, thank you. The vision of Golden Wood is to revive work with love. That we want to cultivate a new vision of work. Our current paradigms of work were innovative a couple centuries ago. The whole technological revolution with the Industrial Revolution created a whole new paradigm of work, which now we just take for granted to be work. That paradigm was, we can be efficient. Human beings can work together very similar to machines. We can all be like cogs in a machine, and we've heard that phrase oftentimes, I feel like a cog in a machine, but that is directly out of a vision of work that saw the efficiencies that the paradigm of a machine brought into our society, and began to change the pace of work and the expectations of work, so that, probably, I mean, even today, the expectation, at least for an older generation, is here's your job description. You're going to be doing this every day. Maybe there's some variation, but for the most part, this is your title, and that title means this is the work you do. And that, in many respects, especially the younger generation, looks at that and says, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to do this same thing day in and day out for, not even years, but perhaps decades. That's just not an attractive vision of work. And when we look at the world that God created, the natural world, you see the diversity, the vibrancy, the concept of seasons, of changing seasons. And there is a whole nother paradigm, if we were to become more aware and attuned to, I think, God's design for work, that could create a very different paradigm than the one that we have now. And that's really at the heart of what we would like to see change, certainly for the next generation. But can we begin to lay down some tracks now to give permission to the younger generation and say, things don't always have to be this way, and it's clear that this is not the way you guys want it to go. How do we begin to reimagine, especially in light of what new technologies allow for us? We live in a season of great disruption in so many different industries, largely accelerated by COVID. But there's also in the disruptions a possibility of reimagining what these industries can be and can do. And that can be an opportunity for AI to help us imagine how might the ecosystem of a forest help us imagine the way that marketing, design, and you can take whatever industry you want to look at, medicine, can begin to reimagine the whole system. Again, go back to the matrix. As human beings, we can hold a very small number of variables in our minds, but if AI can look at all that we have learned from the complexities, the beauty, the diversity, the efficiencies of nature, how might it actually begin to help us reimagine a whole new way of interdependence, of nature, grace, the theme that we talked about last week, in a way that, you wake up on a Monday morning and you're excited to go to work. You don't feel that dread that so many people, this Gallup's poll, most recent poll, was over about 67% of Americans are disengaged at work, and that figure is in the 70s when you go internationally. And so when you think about the fact that people are working 40 to 80 hours a week, and more than half the world's population, or the overwhelming majority, is disengaged, meaning their full sense of humanity is just kind of being put on sleep, and they're just droning about their work. And you think about the tremendous loss of potential, but also the loss of what it means to be created in the image of God, called to cultivate this world. That's where I hope the technology, so that is kind of at the heart of Goldenwood. How do we begin to help reimagine what work can be? What streams need to fertilize the ground so that over the course of years and decades and centuries, one generation will wake up and just feel every morning, I feel so lucky to be alive. And that's where I get excited with AI. When I see a technology like AI, might that be God's spiritual intervention to help us along the way? We don't seem to be able to get there ourselves, but can we use this kind of technology not only to get there in terms of a schematic, but also in the sense of a technology that allows us to be more human, more fully human. I think right now, sadly, the imagination around AI is it dehumanizes us, but is there a possibility that the technology could be used to actually humanize us all the more, to make us more aware of what it means to be created in the image of God, because we become aware of things that in our pride we often kind of shut out.
Let's move that into education, because a lot of what AI is doing is to shift education that was based on industrial realm, really a post-industrial realm, and this way of training people to be engineers or computer scientists. And meanwhile, the liberal arts push back because of the funding that can, come, or the practicality of it will outweigh the benefits of deeper education. And we are afraid that everything that we are afraid of today about technology and AI is really forcing us to think about, well, if you go into engineering school and 4 years later AI can do everything that you're trained to do, then what should an engineer learn on the first year, right?
Yeah.
So every school is trying to figure this out. How do you see this in terms of educating the youth and how the future will unfold due to the impact?
Yeah, I think that's such a huge question. It's so many levels. Some very recent examples. To Khan Academy, that was founded to help children that don't have access to really good tutors to help them. They leverage the power of YouTube to begin to give really high, excellent, classes to kids to help them in their struggles in mathematics, particularly. So that organization partnered with OpenAI pretty early on because they saw the potential, and they just released this new technology that they're beta testing in I think 200 schools in America, and it's called Conmigo. And it's a technology to help these teachers who have large numbers of students to begin to be able to help them and to use AI in a way that just doesn't give them answers, but actually helps the students ask them questions. What don't you understand? And the teacher typically, who can spend obviously one-on-one time with a very small number, at the end of the day can look at the interactions that each student had with the material and can see which students really are struggling. And the technology can help them really pinpoint these students will be okay with the kind of technology, but these particular students need the personal touch of a teacher to help them. And so something as simple as that to help limited resources, and the technology helps these teachers get to the students that really need the help. I think that's a wonderful way of using AI in ways that they're not just giving them answers, they're actually helping cultivate the life of the mind at a young age. And I think, again, any of you who have been teachers, there's such demand, and it's easier just to give answers than to really be thoughtful about educating the mind. And so I love that example.
And at the same time, right, there are issues that my niece is a first-year student at NYU, and she has to go through this writing program and reading program. And I asked her, so are you using AI? And she was like, emphatically, she's like, no, I'm not. But I thought about this, and I thought, well, you have to really learn to read and write. And that's not something that a machine can do because it's such an integrated, deeper skill. So I was very impressed that NYU got this right. Are there areas in education or just in common life that we shouldn't use AI for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the prayer of the church is that discernment, that wisdom. It goes back to Augustine, the ordering of our loves. Which city are we using? Are we building? How is the Spirit enabling us to see the purposes for which this technology exists, and to know, to even program in to AI to say, can you imagine the technology shutting itself off because it's like you're spending way too much time. You need to go and spend some time with your family, your friends.
Which my iPhone does. Actually, I set it so it tells me that my screen time is.
Yeah, so those are the beginnings. But a technology that can go even more to say, look, I am a machine, and you're ascribing to me things that you should not be. Can you give it that kind of intelligence so that it reinforces to humanity? And we're at the very beginning, awkward phase of this technology. So I want to be clear that we'll probably see more negative uses in the same way when the internet first came on. Much more negative uses. But as people begin to use it and become a little bit more aware of what it can and cannot do, That's when I hope we see a bit of a renaissance of how this technology gets deployed in some really beautiful and industry creating and flourishing ways that we never would have even imagined possible. And so I think that's for me like the possibility of this technology, what the internet was for the last probably 20 years, 30 years now. For the next generation, AI will be in terms of opening up a whole new world. And what voices can we begin to speak now in this, again, awkward phase that helps people say, let's build this into our understanding of AI. This is the social imagination around how we think about what AI is, and even calling it AI. I'd like to, one of the terms I'm trying to, I don't think I'm succeeding anyway, but instead of calling it artificial intelligence, can we call it hopeful intelligence? To build into a technology, a vision of the future that inspires hope, instead of a doomsday scenario where machines will figure out that we're not worth having on the planet anymore, but a machine that is not infinitely, but even more so than the human mind, able to see scenarios of flourishing for humanity in our world. And so every time you come to this technology, what gets triggered in your own mind is possibilities of renewal, possibilities of change that really bring about the dignity of human beings. That the technology is very capable of doing that, but how many people have that imagination associated with that technology? I tell people, I asked this question, I said, if you had the whole sum of human knowledge, recorded human knowledge in your pocket, what would you do with that knowledge? And that's what we have. You have the whole sum of written, recorded human knowledge accessible, not just in that you can just draw it up when you need it, but through an intelligence that is able to process that information and give you new permutations of how do I think about the work of Plato compared to the work of Jay-Z, and bring about new questions that incorporate the styles, the knowledge of people and thinkers throughout the ages, and now you have that access, at least a rudimentary form of it, that inspires new possibilities of what can be in our world.
Yeah, because what it's doing really well is pattern matching, right? And this is what a lot of scientists were saying. This is not even artificial in that sense, because it is creating pattern matching algorithms that creates very fast way of matching very complex matrix of information. And it's not really intelligent, right? Because you have to still provide that wisdom and intelligence and integrity to the system. But it's very powerful today. So we're going to go into Q&A here, but I want you to know every question I asked today, I asked ChatGPT, the GPT, to knowing David, knowing Goldenwood, to come up with 5 questions that I should ask in this interview. What it did, but it's misread my ask and came up with 5-week curriculum on AI and how it can be integrated in our spiritual formation, faith and work. So we were reading this morning and we were like, wow, this is pretty good. We should do a 5-week curriculum and maybe do a retreat at the end. That's what it suggested, is have a retreat at the end where you can actually get to know each other and deal with the issues that you're coming up with. Actually really good. Now, what I did, obviously, was to use that ability to organize, to add flesh to the bones and ask questions in a way that made it more human and based on our relationship. I have one more question, but I'm going to ask at the end, and I'll open this up to Q&A for any of you who have thoughts, questions.
Yeah, I mean, this, again, it's just that awkward beginning phase right now where we don't know exactly where this is all going. And so I think even universities are scrambling to figure out how do we begin to approach the questions of ethics and what are the boundaries for this technology, both in a corporate context, but even thinking about in the very near future, the computing technologies. I don't know if you saw 2 days ago, Google released their their Willow chip, which is their first quantum chip that will take computing to a whole nother order of sophistication. And so, and why I bring that up is because we cannot produce our thinking fast enough, at least the ways that we have done with questions of ethics. And you think about how long it takes those kind of questions to be addressed, and the speed in which then new possibilities become real. How can we keep up with that? And it's becoming clear that we need support to help us really think about the ethics involved. And so this is another area where how does AI help us to think about ethical frameworks for how we use this? So in some ways, because of so much of this is new, but can the intelligence that AI brings to us help us understand what might be the potential downsides of employing its technology into these different sectors? And so those kind of questions, it will give us answers that we're not even thinking about ethically, So it can predict scenarios in which this could be used in a destructive way. So in ways, right now, the best that I feel like we can do is begin to frame the positive use cases, and then people begin to use this technology to really employ it in their organizations in ways that are I think, that people will appreciate that technology is being used for those particular purposes. There's so many ways. When I think about analogies, when early on in the sciences, my former life, I was in molecular genetics, and I remember really struggling in many respects with even the whole creation evolution. This is when I was an undergrad. And I remember hearing a talk about how early on humanity really struggled with, was it right to explore nature? Because would you be upsetting gods by really investigating nature? And I remember going to a talk that said part of the contribution that the scriptures gave was that that this world was created to be good. It reflected God, and so we could enter into it, we could study it, in a sense of reverence and awe, but it could be explored and discovered, and that was part of the kind of commission God had given us, as opposed to other worldviews that didn't necessarily have that kind of openness to the created world around us. And so that has stuck with me, that we can see AI in that same way, as it's something to be feared, and not explore it because we're afraid of what it will release. And or we could approach it as part of this capacity that God has given us to cultivate this world, to explore it, and to do things that are in line with what it means to be created in the image of God. And for me, the sad reality is not much separates us from the rest of creation in the sense of DNA-wise, the material aspects of what it means to be a human being. But what I see in Scripture, the one thing that really does set us apart is that relationship with God. And so when we're in relationship with God, it begins to help us use not only see nature a certain way, but also see AI in a certain way. So that what we call our humanity is really the direct outgrowth of a relationship with a God that allows us, that inspires us, that helps us to see all the potentiality that God has created into the world. And how is it that we then take that potentiality and through our imaginations begin to cultivate that in ways that reflect just the tremendous intentions and glory that God had kind of given to us from the very beginning. Yeah, I love that question. It is a bit like you follow your nose. You don't know exactly where this is going to take us, but you have to have enough orientation around, like for us, the whole word, our organization named Goldenwood our vision of work is inspired by the place where the streets of gold meet the trees for the healing of the nations, hence Goldenwood. And that's a reference to Revelation 21 and 22. We know that there is a time when all our yearnings will be met, and there will be in this return, at least the way the scriptures communicate, that all things will be made right. And so, I mean, again, so for me, it's the spiritual presence that I would like us to be able to better sense how might we incorporate spiritual wisdom into the use of collaborative knowledge. If AI represents human knowledge coming together collaboratively, we need spiritual wisdom to be able to use that. And so when I think of hopeful intelligence, how have we learned to bring spiritual wisdom to bear on these, on the realities that we're trying to create that AI can either help us create or destroy very quickly? So, so that's the question. How have we incorporated spiritual wisdom? And so a lot of what we do through Nautilus is we slow people down so that they can become more attentive. And we try to cultivate what we call, borrowing that psychological term, object permanence, or that developmental term. You know, how do we develop spiritual permanence? So that when a baby developed object permanence, that insecurity that is inherent in that child before they develop object permanence is very much akin to, I think, the fears that we all have until we realize God's presence is with us. God is with us. We don't need to be afraid despite all the unknowns of our future. And when we have that security in our hearts, we're able to see one another, and instead of competing with one another, we can actually love one another the way that God calls us to. And that then becomes a positive reinforcing loop than the negative ones we often enter and spiral into. That's fear-oriented. And so I think that question of how do we see more the presence of God in our very midst, I think is what we're trying to lean into. However people want to define that sense, I think that's what we want to work with. If you have a sense that there is transcendence in the world, you know, whether that transcendence comes to you in these religions that have been part of our world and society for a long time, or, you know, we are open to the ways that people, they inherently kind of sense that there is something good, but they can't name it for various reasons.
Yeah.
And so, like, access that.
Yeah, and that's one of the great joys for Hedge and I to be involved in Golden Wood, is that these margin presence of people who are still trying to formulate their spirituality, but doing it in a way that is wide open and you know, serious about their outlook, about wanting to connect love into their lives, not just work, but into their lives. And David, thank you so much for guiding us and being with us, being a neighbor, as well as a preacher today. Final question is, how can we be praying for you?
No, thank you for that question. That, I think, the spiritual wisdom, you know, as we all have more opportunities to interface with this potential technology, how do we access this gift of wisdom that sees the possibilities for good, as we are very aware and shrewd of all the potential destructive uses, of which there are many, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. But at the same time, as with any powerful tool, how do we allow the access that we have to this wisdom to come into our lives in a way that, you know, we can talk about spiritual wisdom, but then there's a difference between talking about it and then how do we begin to position ourselves so that we receive it and incorporate it. So that would be my prayer, that as I continue in the work that God calls me to, that the spiritual wisdom that I know is there somehow, you know, does, pardon the expression, get downloaded in ways that then really affects the outcome or the output. So, yeah.
Thank you. May our eyes of our hearts be open to pray for you that way and your family.